Tuesday, 10 at 10. I am your host, Richard Charpentier, and today we'll be answering questions that are sent by bakers, answered by a baker. And let's get started. So we have our first question today. It's regarding someone who's running a pizza place, and they do one thing where they make a Poolish, and it's a pre-ferment, and they make their pizza and they put it in the fridge, but based on the long email, they're fermenting it up to 5 days. And they're basically saying the pizza has an amazing taste, but so what do you think the taste difference between cold fermented one and almost not usable dough? So now you're talking about fermentation. And once you look at the process of fermentation, you are producing basically organic, volatile acid, organic acids. You are also producing different acids that will create, acetic, lactic, and those will have a different fermentation. And when you put your dough in the refrigerator, as you mentioned, at 30 degrees Fahrenheit, the fermentation is much, much slower. So the dough might survive, but then your yeast, which are biological organisms, will need a certain amount of food to keep on survive. What happens as the dough, when the yeasts are depleting, the dough will start becoming softer, tackier, and it's due to the fact that the yeast cells will start dying, creating glutathione and reducing the dough to make it sticky and long, and you're losing volume. So fermentation is also it is biological, but also the enzymatic reaction still happening. And remember, it's an environment for the yeast to keep on growing and budding, and therefore that's what you need. So I think you need to really determine a point how long can you keep it in the fridge? Because the fridge, again, temperature, once you open the door, you get fluctuation of temperature, and based on where you place your dough, either on the top, on the bottom, it's going to be different because the top will always have warmer temperatures, in the fridge by a little bit, but a little bit can make a difference, especially when you're dealing with a yeast raised product, meaning the yeast is activating. So my recommendation is, yes, the flavor from difference will come from the amount of fermentation, and the texture will change as well. So you have to determine something that works best for your environment and continue doing it. A good question, thank you. Next question, how much potassium sorbate can I use to make a 1 pound stone cake? Well, that's a great question, but again, not enough information. When determining, you're saying you want to add potassium sorbate in the stone cake, which I looked it up, it's a recipe, different to cake. It's basically a cake. It's what's your shelf life, two, what's your pH, what's your water activity of your product, and let's determine how much to add, because right now it's just to add something, because you're not talking about the shelf life of your product. It's very difficult to say, oh, let's just put it in. There's no, we don't make cakes saying let's put potassium sorbate, because it's a great thing to put. Potassium sorbate is being added as part of the ingredients, as part of a sort of a box you build for shelf life extension that includes good sanitation, that includes a balanced formulation, that includes, trained employees, that, packaging. It's really more complex than just putting one ingredient and be like, all right, done. I've done that. Look at different resources. Again, there's a lot of people there at Bakerpedia there to help you with, your questions and help you, guide you through to move forward. But right now, I would take a step back and understand what are you trying to do before adding another ingredients in your cake. All right, but good question. Thank you. So next question. What is the difference between baking with high melt point, shortening, and vegetable oil, and which one is better for soft bread bun production? Again, if you're going with a melt point of, let's say, 92 to about 115 degrees, you just have, that was my rule of thumb, you just have to think of look at the fat by itself at room temperature. And if it's a fat that when you press, it's hard at room temperature, the fat will recrystallize at their native state or native or altered state. And if it's to make solid, most likely it will come back and recrystallize like that. So that means if you're in a climate where it's warmer, you don't have to worry. But winter, sometimes a lot of manufacturer will change winter fat and summer fats. So, and change the melt point accordingly. Of course, in the winter you want a softer fat, and in the summer you want a harder fat. And it's being used across for to interchange the fats for production. And again, for your production, I would say it's up to you and up to your customers of what they prefer. But because not only the fat might alter based on your recipe, because if you have a lot of sugars and everything, it will change it, but it might affect the texture, but also the type of fat, and based on the melting point, canola oil versus butter, they have different flavors and pack different flavors within your product. So I would just look into that and see what works best for your operation. But yes, it makes a small difference. And also from a production standpoint is how you bring, if it's a liquid fat, it's easier to scale versus a solid fat at room temperature, which is more challenging to scale. So those are the points to think through: flavor and texture. Thank you for your question. Next question: how does relative humidity affect relative humidity has any effect on food texture? So just for a quick reminder, relative humidity is a measure of the water vapor in the air. So, and that vapor is basically translated as a percent, meaning the relative humidity. And what it does is it does affect, you can see the higher the relative humidity, usually in the summertime, based on where you are, of course, and it does bring more water vapor in the air. So sometimes in facilities, in food facilities, if you have a warehouse where you're storing chocolate, too high of that will create blooming, too high of a relative humidity. So which is when basically the sugar crystal looks white. That's called blooming. It also, if it's too dry, it will also affect the crust on certain products because you don't have enough relative humidity. If you have too much relative humidity, then you have breads outside, it will make the crust soggy. So yes, relative humidity does affect the texture, affects different foods and manufacturing facility. It's something that is tough to control, unless I've seen bakeries having really, basically air conditioned and controlled room where they can control that, but then it becomes very expensive. So if not, you're dealing with the challenges of, different relative humidity, which is in seasonal weather, where winter it's really low relative humidity, can get to like 25, 30, and summertime 60 to 80, when it's really hot and humid. So, and that variation will affect how it works in the bakery. Let's say in a bakery, you're making a dough and it's a low relative humidity and it's not covered properly. It's going to create a crust, as I mentioned earlier, on your raw dough. And so it's a lot of things to prevent. That's why proof boxes has about 90% relative humidity. When you walk in 85 and it feels good. That's what we're used to. But great question. Moving on to the next question. Hello, what is the ideal temperature required for burger buns in a rotary oven, and how many seconds of steam? Thank you. So based on Mark Florkey, he said 350 for that type of oven. And again, they vary per brand. It could be 350 to 375. Are you using, pan, and what's the gauge of the pan? Is this pretty thick? So that could make a little bit of a difference. And how much steam? I would say between 3 to 5 seconds steam is plenty for your buns to be steamed. I hope it answered your question. So next question, and the last question for today: sunflower lecithin is a preservative. Is sunflower lecithin a preservative as well? I have a protein cookie and would like it to last 2 months without adding a bunch of ingredients. Is sunflower lecithin a good approach? So sunflower lecithin is a natural emulsifier and stabilizer and used in food. It helps for several, it's used in several applications. One, emulsification, it's used in bread to soften the crumb. It's used also pen releasing agents that you see for cakes, that it helps release better. And in terms of, is this a preservative? No, it's not. It's an emulsifier. So it's not a, to help preserve the food. And on your second question, can lecithin be good to help with your shelf life? Yes, but with a but, because again, what formulation are you using? Are you already using sugar? Excuse me, are you already using eggs? Eggs naturally contain lecithin, so adding lecithin on top of lecithin might be overdone. So you have to start thinking, how do you preserve it for 2 months? Usually with cookies, it's done also by playing with the different sugar, because sugar come in different forms, and it's about managing your water within your product and understanding, as a cookie already, it's a low water activity. So you have to go and figure out, what can you do to it? What's your packaging? Do you have the right packaging? Are you using a potential enzyme? Or are you using a different hydrocolloid? And it's about keeping the water in, and how much water you have in, and how much emulsifiers. But if it's a regular cookie, you should be fine where you don't need lecithin. But just as a thought, so again, that was it. The end of Tuesday 10 at 10 for today. Thank you very much for sending all of your questions, and thank you for following Bakerpedia. You guys have a great, fantastic day. Happy baking.